Hey gang, so I'm really excited to meet everybody and talk a little bit more in detail about this whole idea of flipped learning and figuring out how we can make this work in your own classroom. Now, I really want to model the whole flipped concept as much as possible. So what we're going to do is you have a little bit of homework that you're doing right now. I want to talk about the concept of flipping so that way when we finally meet face to face, we can go over more of the application and the details and all those things that we need to do to make this happen in your own classroom. Now, here's a little bit of what I think flipped learning done right is. In fact, I've been doing this for a few years in my classroom, and as I go around talking to teachers about this, there's a lot of times that this kind of comes up in conversation. I get a teacher who says, yeah, I flip my classroom. I have my students watch Khan Academy videos all the time. And to be honest, I kind of cringe a little bit when I hear that, because this is what I worry about. I think a lot of people have this idea of what the flipped classroom is, and they say, well, instead of lecturing to my students during class and then sending them home to do worksheets, we're just going to flip those two. And I kind of think that is like flipped learning's evil twin there. I don't think that's good teaching, and it definitely doesn't lead to quality learning. What we have to start thinking about here is how can we do this the right way? How can we leverage technology and some of these tools to have more time as teachers to be able to make an impact with our students in the whole teaching and learning process? Now, Aaron Sams is one of the godfathers of flipped learning, and one of the things that he always says is this, that there's no such thing as the flipped classroom. So if we're going to meet together and you're looking for this box that you can just kind of take this stuff off and check off all these things and say, hey, I have a flipped classroom, probably not going to work out for you. What this does, though, is this lets you know that there's lots of ways that you can use this idea of flipping to meet the needs of your students. So feel free to kind of think of, okay, how am I going to tweak this to meet my own kids' needs? Now, Ramsey Masalam is a teacher out in San Francisco who's done a lot of research on how to do this the right way and how to do this the wrong way. And this is how he describes flipped learning. He says that flipped learning is this intentional removal of direct instructions, so like lecture and kind of step by step, this is how you do this, or this is how you do that. Remove that from what's called the community learning space and move that into the individual learning space. Let me give you an example. These are some of my kids, 5 out of like 32 in my 5th period chemistry class. Now, I've got a wide variety of kids here. I've got some kids that went on to become chemical or are studying to become chemical engineers at Michigan State. I have some kids in here who were just absolutely brilliant, but if they weren't entertained, they had no problem just picking up a book and ignoring things and failing my class. I have some students in here who very much needed some hand-holding, who were constantly worried that they weren't doing things exactly right. And they were always saying, Mr. Spencer, is this how I do number 5? Mr. Spencer, are you sure this is what's going to be on the test? I'm sure you've had some of those. I had some students in here who were very good at playing school. They could ace multiple choice tests like there was no tomorrow. But when it came to actually learning things and being able to describe what they learned, there was a gap there. I also had some students who really struggled. I'm sure some of you were like me. I had students who the only reason they were there is because their patrol officer was checking on them. And the problem that we run into is that when we have such a wide variety of students, we're never gonna be able to meet the needs of all of them. So this is kind of my problem. This is what I was doing in my classroom and kind of what was happening. We've got our whole Bloom's taxonomy here. And what I was doing when I was lecturing a lot at my students and then sending them home to work on problems is I was going at this with the whole one-size-fits-all attitude. I was trying to teach my students the basics in this large group. And the problem I was running into is that the students who already got it, they were sitting there waiting to move on. The students who were really struggling were frustrated because they couldn't keep up. And then I had a whole range in between. And because I was trying to do this all the same way, it was a hit or miss thing. But the worst problem was I was sending my students home after this to work on the application piece, on these higher order thinking skills. A lot of them were going home to houses where parents or they didn't have anybody who could help them out, and they were frustrated there too. And the problem then happens is that these frustrated students who didn't get things done come back the next day. They have lots of questions, and instead of being able to move on, we have to go over this again and again to make sure that they get it. And I wasn't having enough time to be able to get to some of those higher level thinking activities that I really wanted to spend class time on. But what if there was a way to be able to let some of this background knowledge, some of these lower on Bloom's taxonomy activities, what if there was a way for students to do those at their own pace? What if there was a way for the kids who get it already to be able to move faster through that? Or the kid who really struggles to be able to have access and kind of go over it a few times as needed in order to understand the basics. And then when we come to class, to be able to turn that into a learning community where students have that background knowledge and they are then working together to do these higher level thinking activities. That's really what flipped learning is. Now, what I want to do here is show you a video. This is by a teacher. Her name's Katie Gimba, and she works with this Friday Institute. And she explains why she flipped her classroom. Take a look.
I've been teaching math for the last 5 years, and this is why I flipped my classroom. This is what my classroom used to look like. I was teaching to the middle group of the class, the students that could follow along with what we were doing, and we were going through the content, while I had a group of higher level students not challenged, bored with the information, ready to move forward. And I had a struggling group of students that were not receiving enough effective remediation. They didn't have the basic content they needed to be working on the content we were currently covering, or they needed more help in order to be successful. This led to a 90% use of class time being spent on delivery and review of content. 90% of the time I was at the front of the classroom lecturing to a group of students, and I wasn't meeting all of their needs. 10% of class time was actually spent on application, which led to, depending on students, to do the application needed to be successful. They had to go home or outside of class and work on applying the concepts that I was giving out in class. This constant battle of not reaching the needs of all students and feeling the need to differentiate for all of my learners allows teachers to feel overwhelmed and ineffective, because we see the need for differentiation, but there's just not enough time for effective differentiation. This called for a drastic change in how we teach. This is where flipping the classroom comes in. Now the students outside of class preload the content. They get the information they're going to need for class. They can pause, rewind, and rewatch the videos as many times as they need to. They can post questions online to their classmates or to the teacher. And it's a self-paced program where they can be remediated by going back and reviewing former topics, or they can work ahead when they've already mastered a concept and are ready to look forward. They get the content here before class, so that when they come into class, my whole classroom has now shifted, where I'm at the center of the class, working between these differentiated groups, focused on different pieces of application. I can now work between each of these groups that are moving at their own pace. This has created a 90% use of class time spent on application of the content, and 10% of class time is spent on delivery of content, when I can answer questions that have been posted or take any other questions that have come up from applying the content. Now in my classroom, all students are engaged and challenged. I have time to work with each group give them individualized time and instruction as they need, and I can actually work between each of the groups to provide effective differentiation for all my varied groups of learners. My struggling students, my middle group of learners, and I can now extend and expand on my higher level students' prior knowledge and challenge them in the classroom.
So I hope this gives a background of what flipped learning could look like. Now remember what Aaron said, there's no such thing as the flipped classroom. And when we get together, we're going to talk a lot about the different kinds of wrinkles and other things that we can do in our classrooms to really use this concept to meet the needs of our students, to let them learn at their own pace and to really turn that classroom into this community learning space. Now, when we get together face to face, I want you to know what to expect. First thing, we're going to do what's called the spaghetti test. Okay, so you know that supposedly with spaghetti, if it's done, you can throw it up against the wall and it'll stick. If you throw it against the wall and it doesn't stick, it's not done. Now, what we're going to do when we get together is we're going to have a lot of teachers who are going to be kind of sharing their experiences with how they used flipping. There's going to be a lot of differences there, and that's a good thing. So, but some teachers might be a little overwhelmed by that. Don't be. We're going to do the spaghetti test. We're going to throw a lot of things at you, but we want to figure out the things that'll stick for you in your classroom. So don't be afraid to look at this and say, you know what, I'm going to take bits and pieces from these teachers and I'm going to kind of turn this into what works for me. Now, we're also really lucky. Techsmith is going to be there. Techsmith is a software company up in Okemos, and they are the makers of Jing and Snagit and Camtasia, and I've been very fortunate to get to work with them quite a bit. They are absolutely phenomenal, and they are sending some of their best trainers here to work with us to kind of help out with this whole content creation piece. And in fact, if you want to take a look at this website down here at the bottom of the screen, this will give you some ideas about different ways that you can create your own content in your classroom, regardless of what your subject area is. But once again, I am really excited to let you guys kind of get to meet some of the Techsmithies and kind of see how they can help us out in the classroom. Now, with that in mind, there is going to be some hands-on stuff going on here. So you're going to have some homework. In the afternoon, we are going to spend time creating your own content. So in order to be able to spend time in the best way possible, I want you to come ready with some ideas. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of what I call a point of pain. So think about like the last 2 weeks or so. Think about one of those days when at the very end you sit down at your desk, you exhale, and you think of, I had to explain this so many times today, it was painful. Those are the kind of things that work well in this video content format. So think of your points of pain. For example, was there something that, like a little idea or a lesson that you had to teach repeatedly throughout the day? Think of like a 2 or 3 minute content lesson that you could do when we meet face to face. Or maybe you had some students who were saying, how do I do number 4? Or I don't understand this. Think of some tutorials or some examples that you could create, that you could explain, that would help your students be able to have access to this whenever they need. Or let's say you are an administrator and you are getting ready for a faculty meeting. Do you really want to spend 15 minutes on a Friday morning going through bullet points while the teachers are thinking of all the things that they want to do? We're going to create some content where you can give some background information and send that out to your faculty, so that way when you get together you can talk about the application of things rather than just the background knowledge. I hope this explains a little bit about the concept of flipping. I got to tell you, I am extremely excited to get to meet you face to face, to talk about how we can make this work in your own classroom, and we'll see you soon.